So one of the pieces that we covered earlier today was Ilhan Omar speaking to Elliot Abrams, the Trump administration's special envoy to Venezuela, and basically sort of dressing him down about his past crimes, his past lying to House Foreign Affairs committees. And we wanted to have a look at it more closely and see exactly what she said.
Right.
Ms. Omar.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for your testimonies. Mr. Adams, in 1991, you pleaded guilty to 2 counts of withholding information from Congress regarding your involvement in the Iran-Contra affair, for which you were later pardoned by President George H.W. Bush. I fail to understand why members of this committee or the American people should find any testimony that you give today to be truthful.
If I can respond to that.
It wasn't a question.
On February,
that was not a question. That was I reserve the right to my time.
It is not right.
That was
Members
not a
of this
question.
Committee can attack
On February
a witness
8th,
who is not permitted to reply.
that was not a question. Thank you for your participation. On February 8th, 1982, you testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee about U.S. policy in El Salvador. In that hearing, you dismissed as communist propaganda report about the massacre of El Mozote, in which more than 800 civilians, including children as young as 2 years old, were brutally murdered by U.S.-trained troops. During that massacre, some of those troops bragged about raping a 12-year-old girl before they killed them. Girls before they killed them. You later said that the U.S. policy in El Salvador was a fabulous achievement. Yes or no, do you still think so?
From the day that President Duarte was elected in a free election to this day, El Salvador has been a democracy. That's a fabulous achievement.
Yes or no, do you think that massacre was a fabulous achievement that happened under our watch?
That is a ridiculous question, and I
Yes or no?
No.
I will
Sorry, Mr.
I will
Chairman,
take
but
that as a yes.
I am not going to respond to that kind of personal attack, which is not a question.
Yes or no, would you support an armed faction within Venezuela that engages in war crimes, crimes against humanity or genocide, if you believe they were serving U.S. interest, as you did in Guatemala, El Salvador, and Nicaragua?
I am not going to respond to that question. I'm sorry. I don't think this entire line of questioning is meant to be real questions, and so I will not reply.
Whether under your watch, a genocide will take place, and you will look the other way because American interests were being upheld, is a fair question, because the American people want to know that anytime we engage a country, that we think about what our actions could be and how we believe our values are being furthered. That is my question. Will you make sure that human rights are not violated and that we uphold international and human rights?
I suppose there is a question in there, and the answer is that the entire thrust of American policy in Venezuela is to support the Venezuelan people's effort to restore democracy to their country. That's our policy.
I don't think anybody disputes that. The question I had for you is that does the interest of the United States include protecting human rights and include protecting people against genocide?
That is always the position of the United States.
Thank you. I yield back my time.
Well, that was fascinating to watch, and it's quite interesting to see somebody like him be held accountable for his past actions.
Yeah, there's some interesting takeaways in there. So not only, like we were talking about earlier, how she talks about the massacre that took place that ultimately led to Duterte being elected president, and he refers to that as a fair election, and that democracy has been in the country ever since. That's not true. It wasn't a free election. Anyone who on the ideological right was in fear of being assassinated by death squads. It was an extremely right-wing time in the era. She says one thing that I think you can kind of interpret it either way, and that's when she's talking about Venezuela more recently, and basically saying, is it a goal of ours to respect human rights and respect sort of international norms in this? And Abrams' response is something to the effect of, we're doing it to restore democracy. And she says, I don't think anyone disputes that. And I've heard of people on further ideologically left than me have complained that shows that, she's on board with regime change in Venezuela.
No, that doesn't show that she's on board with regime change at all. I think what really she's asking is, at the end, if there's a potential involvement of American forces in Venezuela or us supporting a armed group in Venezuela, are we going to make sure that there's not another genocide that happened in Nicaragua or Guatemala? We don't want something like that to take place, but unfortunately it already did, and it's devastating to know that countless lives were lost.
It's still so satisfying to watch him squirm, because she's totally in the right. She's basically making a very accurate point that Abrams has been engaged in nefarious, illegal, unhumanitarian activity for decades, and hides behind American exceptionalism and spreading democracy to save his own skin.
What's interesting too is that with Abrams and people like him, the establishment media, that's including CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, they usually bring people like him or others like him on board as political analysts, especially when it comes down to talking about U.S. intervention in other countries like Iran, like Iraq, like Syria, like Libya, and so many other areas. And usually what these guys do is they're seen as advisors and people that understand the situation on the ground. But when we take a step back and look at our involvement in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Libya, and in other nations across the world, it's always led to the same kind of issues, which is a destabilized government, lack of accountability on the forces that we do support, and us supporting a government that hasn't been elected. And we can't keep doing that. Paul?
Yeah, one last point I want to make about this. It's obvious from watching this exchange that Abrams is experienced in engaging in Senate or House testimony, right? He used a lot of very legally phrases to kind of weasel his way out of things. When finally, first of all, he complains about, this is an attack, this is an unfair line of questioning, which...
Well, too bad.
He's it is a fair line of questioning.
And he's lied under oath, not once, but twice.
But finally, when Omar is able to pin him down and say, in America's actions with regard to Venezuela, will you commit to basically respecting human rights and respecting international norms with regard to human rights? And his answer basically is, well, that's always America's position. We didn't ask what America's official position was. We asked if you will do this.
Go figure.
All right, so the other thing we wanted to look at, so that's the full exchange with C-SPAN. And that's sort of our take, generally speaking, on how that went down. I think it's extremely favorable for Ilhan Omar. It looks really bad for Abrams because, by all accounts, he appears to be a despicable human. Let's have a look at what CNN said about this exchange and how they covered it.
A member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, who has been critical of Omar's words, would not say whether she should be removed from his panel.
I'm not commenting on anything.
At a hearing today on Venezuela, Omar engaged in a contentious exchange with Trump's special envoy, Elliot Abrams, who wanted a chance to respond to her criticism.
I fail to understand why members of this committee or the American people should find any testimony that you give today to be truthful?
If I can respond to that.
It wasn't a question.
It was
On
an
February,
attack.
that was
It
not
an
a
attack, and I would
question. That was
turn-
I reserve the right to my time.
It is not right.
That was
Members
not
of
a
this
question.
committee-
And Aaron, I had a chance to ask the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, if she agrees with the Republicans and that Omar should be removed from committee assignments. She said no, and she said the Republicans do not have clean hands on any of this. She cited chants at President Trump's rallies where they said USA in front of the president's face, as she said, and they didn't apologize for the remarks. And she also said, where were they over 13 years when Steve King, the Iowa Republican congressman, had made a series of racist comments until last year they decided to pull him from his committee assignments. They said, why didn't they do that sooner?
That was fascinating to watch. First, I noticed they did cut out some aspects of that video. And I wish they did add in more context to really the exchange that we saw earlier, so that the viewers who were watching that on CNN would understand why Ilhan Omar was talking to Abrams in that way, and actually, questioning him in regards of past actions that he did under previous administrations.
That was highly deceptively edited,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
It starts with her saying, I don't know why anyone would consider your testimony today to be truthful, and cut out the sentence prior to that justifies that comment. Mm-hmm. That comment is there to say, hey, you lied to this committee before on topics like this. Mm-hmm. Why should we trust you? Instead, they cut out the first half and just said, why should we trust you? And you go, I don't want to respond to that. And then they have their little scuffle. And then I suppose it's good that Nancy Pelosi says that she shouldn't be removed. But to compare that exchange of saying, I don't think we should trust you, you've lied to us before, that wasn't a question. I actually have questions. Please stop trying to defend yourself from that. I actually have real questions. Trying to compare that to Steve King's racist comments.
There's a difference. There is a difference. First, she's literally asking him about past policies that he was a part of, and also the impact that it did on to the people of Nicaragua, Guatemala, and whether or not those same consequences and ramifications would happen to the people of Venezuela. And these are questions that need to be asked because it's quite clear that there is a reaction from the American people about whether or not we should be involved in Venezuela. And I noticed that corporate media is not really covering that. So that video was heavily edited. So good on Nancy Pelosi for not calling her to be removed. But at the same time, the people who watch CNN are being denied the fact, or not being informed on the fact, that Abrams has lied to that committee, not once, but twice. And it's the first time in a long time that we see somebody in that seat of power really hold somebody accountable, or at least question them for their past actions.
And, I mean, it's worth faulting CNN here for not only not reporting the actual content that went down in that hearing, but also for further muddying the waters by talking about people wish he should be removed from that, basically reporting on the bubble outrage from Republicans. Like, that's not the important thing. You've glossed over completely the context of why what she said was important, and essentially undermine any effort to say, hey, this guy being special envoy to Venezuela is probably a bad idea. Also, we probably shouldn't be recognizing an unelected person as the president of that country. Also, this sham narrative that it's Maduro is oppressing his people and we're going in there to save them. That's a way of framing what's going on that is disingenuous and completely not accurate, and it's really, really hard to see. So that I wouldn't. It's expected, right, for CNN and other mainstream news to be essentially complicit in this, but that is what it is.
Yeah, and that's why we need your guys' help to support a strong independent media, not only here in Chicago but worldwide, so that we can actually cover the stories that aren't being covered by corporate media, because CNN clearly cut out a lot from that video. And you could tell when you see something on C-SPAN in its full context and then watch it on the establishment media, you're going to get two different stories, and the end result is who gets informed? Really nobody, unless they watch the full video in its original context.